So another question I often get is, Dave, how do you cut the paper and fold the paper so that you can get the different shapes needed for various snapology projects? So for example, this guy, um, you know, the triangle is one shape here, which would require a certain length of cardstock, but then we've got pentagons here in too. In other projects, I've gone all the way up to a decagon. So you'll need different strips of paper for different shapes that your solid, your geometric solid requires. So here I want to talk about the folding techniques I've seen. All right, so one that I like to use in my videos just because it's kind of the beginner step is I like to show what I call the wrap technique. Okay, you take your two strips, and let's say I'm trying to make a triangle. So what I'll do is I'll hold one strip of paper perpendicular to the other, and edge to edge. So the left hand edge of the blue piece is touching the left hand edge of the black green piece. And so what I'll do is just hold them like that and eyeball it as close to perpendicular as I can. And then what I'll do is I'll start folding. Wrap once. And then while it's like this, I'll crease it with my fingernail really good. And as I folded it over, I made sure to kind of stay 90-degree perpendicular. Then I'll do a second wrap, a third wrap, and then a fourth wrap. All right, and then for a triangle, I like to do 4.5 because this is the minimum amount of paper I can use to get a triangle that's going to hold together. But before I explain that, let me talk about something else. Think about what I just did here. I just wrapped a piece of paper around itself. And so if you think about it, even though it's only the thickness of the cardstock, it actually makes a big difference. It's getting wider and wider and wider, if I kind of exaggerate. And so when I unravel it, what I get is what I like to call just our units. They're almost perfect squares, but not quite. They're more like little rectangles. But I've got 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, and the little half a unit. And if I were to take this and measure it, you would notice that as I went across, the units get wider. This unit's almost a perfect square, but this one's a little bit wider than this one, and then so's this one, and then this one, because we wrapped the paper around itself. It got substantially larger as we went around. Okay, but sometimes you actually need that, because what I'm making this for is a triangle. So when I wrap this into a triangle shape, I need this fourth unit to extend and fold down a little bit past this edge here. If it was the same, when I tried to fold around the edge, it would bind up. But the fact that this unit is wider than the unit I'm folding it on top of, now as I fold it, this has enough space right here to fold over around the edge without binding up here. Okay, and so this is what I meant about 4.5 units long. What I like to do is I like to have it just enough where this wraps around so that it doesn't come apart. Okay, it will come apart right now if I just let it down, but once you put it in the structure, it won't. So if I were to use less than this, some people say, well, why can't I just use 3 units? Well, if you think about it, 3 units, that's definitely not going to work because these two ends don't hold together. Well, what about 4 units? Well, you could do that, but then what would happen here is it's hard to show here, this would slide apart. So I do 4.5 units because this little extra half hooks around the end and it doesn't pull apart. Okay, some people like to do 6. They like to be more consistent in terms of just having it go, a double thickness all the way around. That's kind of up to you. But for me, I like to minimize the amount of paper I use because I use a lot of paper. I go through reams of it, and so the less waste, the better. And so I've found that 4.5 is the minimum that I can get away with. All right, now, what about other fold techniques? What about connectors? Connectors need to be more consistent. So another technique that some people use is, I've seen it referred to as Jacob's ladder, is what they'll do is they'll kind of start off the same way, except with their 2 strips, they'll not only hold it end to end, they'll put it corner to corner like this. So, not end to end, edge to edge. So they'll put, just like before, I'll put this edge to this edge, but I'm also going to make it go corner to corner. So it's like this. And so the wrap technique there is to start off like I did before, just wrap it around, give it a nice good crease, but then rotate it. And now fold the other one. Whereas the other technique I was just working on one of the strips, here I'm working on 2. Turn it, wrap. turn it, and fold. And you just keep doing this. So notice I'm not folding over itself. I just keep folding, I guess what you would say, down. I'm down from the camera this way. Okay, and you just do this the whole way through. Instead of focusing on one piece and then cutting, this one you just fold the entire strips, I should say, both of them. So if you think about it, in this technique, what I'm doing, if I show the side profile, is I'm just going like that. And so if you notice, if I hold it up close, they never get any wider. So the width of the units, when I take this apart and you look at the units, they're more consistent. Okay, so if I hold it, you can, and I were to kind of compare, let's even be extreme about this. I'm going to take this unit, the first one, and I'm going to compare it with this last whole one and hold them side by side. And you'll notice they're the same. They're the same width here because of the fold technique. So I might use something like this for the pentagons. If I were to use this technique, then at each of these sides would get slightly bigger and bigger and bigger, and you probably wouldn't notice it that much, but your pentagon might not be as symmetrical as you want. Whereas this technique, I can wrap it up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and those 5 units are all going to be congruent side lengths. Okay, and I can just wrap it up a bit more. Now here's where you're going to run into little problems, because now what I'm wrapping around is the same length. You'll notice it binds up slightly. You can see here, right, when I've overlaid these two, and it's kind of hard to see on camera, but it doesn't quite match up right. Okay, because of the thickness of the paper. I need this outer one to be slightly longer than the inner one, but for what we're doing, you'll be okay. All right. And for this, for a pentagon, I like to usually go about 7.5. If I were to cut it here, I find that's just the bare minimum I can get away with, where it all will still hold together. Okay, and again, you can go further than this, but I wouldn't go less than that, because you have this problem of the pieces sliding out and coming apart. Now, the other question at this point I want to address is, why the half? I personally like to do the half because later down the road, when we throw a connector over this, that edge will be covered up. You won't see it. Okay, it's really honestly that big a deal. It's just something I've just made it a habit of doing so that I don't see that edge either here or here. Honestly, it probably wouldn't make a difference. Okay, but just one little extra thing I like to do. Now, what about all the other shapes? Well, in this tutorial, I have a little spreadsheet that I've just added to it, which shows you, well, how many units would you go for a square or a pentagon or a hexagon or a decagon. And so I put what I recommend as far as like the minimum amount, but you can always go more than that if you want to kind of make it more strong and double it up. And like instead of doing 4.5 for a triangle, you want to do 6, feel free. But my chart includes kind of the minimum. All right. Now, finally, the connector. Of these 2 fold techniques I've shown you, the wrap technique and the Jacob's ladder technique, probably for the connector you should use the Jacob's ladder technique, because if you think about a connector, I'm going to cut this to a length of 4. A connector should be more symmetrical. The idea is that you have your connector like this, you slide your pieces on, and then these fold down to the middle like so. And again, you can see it kind of, if I hold it close, see how it binds up like that because of the exact same length? But it's not enough to make a huge difference. You can just squash it flat. But we want these to be more symmetrical, especially down here in the groove. The whole idea of snapology is that this piece wraps around another piece to hold it in place, and what holds everything in place is that this gap in between is held close together. There's no really wide gaps here. If there were wide gaps on this shape, what would happen is that these pieces would pop out all the time. But because of all these angles being very small and acute, those flaps get held in. Okay, what I've found is that on a connector, if they always work better if they're symmetrical and that you don't have some flap. In fact, let me exaggerate this. So let's say one unit was shorter than another. Okay, well what would happen is that this edge right here would not touch all the way down here in the groove, and so it would have more of a tendency to pop out than this one. This one you can see is kind of staying in place because it's all the way down in the center of the groove, and so I'd have to open this way up for this to pop out. Whereas if I'm slightly off on this side where I've cut this one short, and notice how it doesn't touch the bottom here, it takes less of an opening for that to pop out. You know, I can have it like this, fine, but then it gets to here, and it's going to pop out on you. It's going to go, and your piece is going to fall apart. So as far as connectors go, I might consider doing the Jacob's ladder technique because you get nice symmetrical and equal units, and so those will hold together better as connectors. All right, I hope this all makes sense. This is just showing you a little of different fold techniques I've come across. Yeah, I hope to elaborate on this in some subsequent videos because even I have some fold techniques that go beyond this.